Are you ready to be great? Stop letting self-doubt, insecurity, and fear prevent you from building your business. This morning, wake up to success. Here's John Preston.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us here. Today, we're going to continue our discussion on habits and how they're the building blocks for success. You know, we can do anything once, we can do it twice, but it's only when we get in the habit of doing those things we need to do to be successful that we'll see the needle really start to move and our businesses grow. You know, earlier in a previous podcast, we talked about how it's important not to get frustrated because we all stumble, we all make mistakes, we all fall off the wagon. One of the biggest mistakes people make when they try to change a habit is they get frustrated, they beat themselves up, and they give up way too early. And it's a whole lot easier to make change with positive emotions than it is with negative emotions. We also talked about how motivation is a very poor tool for long-term change. Our motivation changes daily. And while it may be easy for us to get excited about something once and use that motivation and that excitement to get something done, if we're going to make something consistent, the motivation simply is not going to be there. Yesterday, we talked about how you could look at behavior and habits from a simple formula, that a behavior occurs when motivation combines with ability and is met with a prompt. And we use that to figure out how to change some of our bad habits. Well, today we're going to take that a step further and look at how we can use that same formula to help create change in a positive way and build these positive habits. So the first thing you need to know, and this comes directly from BJ Fogg's book, Tiny Habits, is that you don't want to make your habits too big. In fact, it's a whole lot easier to make tiny habits than it is to make big habits. And in fact, if you structure your tiny habits in the right way, it almost becomes harder not to do them than to do them. And then you can build from there to make real changes. To give you a good example of this, I want to talk with the author itself, Dr. Fogg. And when he mentioned this in his book, he used this as an example. One of his goals was to get in shape. And so he started breaking that down to see what that would look like. And he wanted to start doing push-ups. And so your first thought is, I'm going to do 50 push-ups every day when I get up. And that's just, that sounds good. But it's also hard. One of the things that plays with a habit is the ability to do it. And there's probably going to be some mornings before you get in shape that you just can't do 50. And so if it's harder to do, it's less likely that you're going to do it. So he broke that down a step further. He broke that down to 2 push-ups every time he pees. Now, that kind of seems silly, but if you think about what we talked about motivation and ability and prompt, he attached that as a prompt. Every time he pees, he does a couple of push-ups. And if he pees 7 or 8 times a day, that's 14 push-ups. That's a start towards getting in shape. And once he's consistently doing that, he can build from there. And that's where you need to be. You need to decide what you want and then break that down into very, very small pieces and make it to where you can create these habits, these tiny habits that become the building blocks for your success. So the first thing you need to do is decide what your aspiration is. Is it about losing weight? Is it about getting in shape? Is it about reaching out to more customers throughout the day, which is a big, big habit that we all need to do more of if we're going to build our business. And then once you decide what that aspiration is, then you start breaking it down into smaller and smaller and smaller habits. And then once you get to that habit you want to create, like in the case of the 2 push-ups, then suddenly you start looking for a cue. Anybody can do that. The ability to do 2 push-ups is very easy. So you start looking for that prompt And he set his prompt to be every time he peed. Now let's imagine, let's break this down a little bit. Let's say your goal is to call 50 potential clients a day. Well, that seems pretty daunting. 50 rejections or possible rejections in a day will beat anybody up. That just seems like a couple hours of raw hell to most of us. So you got to break that down. You got to break that down. So let's break it down like this. Maybe you drink a cup of coffee throughout the day. And so that's already one of your habits, that you drink maybe 4 cups of coffee a day. Well, then establish maybe your tiny habit is to make 5 phone calls. 5 doesn't seem like that much. That's not intimidating. Anybody can make 5. And I'll do 5 phone calls every time I have a drink of coffee. Every time I have a new coffee in front of me, I'm going to make 5 phone calls. And there's your tiny habit. You've got something that you have the ability to do. It's very easy to do. You have the motivation because you want to grow your business. You just need the prompt, and your cup of coffee becomes the prompt. And what you'll find is that's an easy habit to do. And then you evaluate it regularly. And after a week or so, you find yourself easily making 5 calls every time you have a cup of coffee. Maybe at that point, you say, okay, well, my next habit is I'm going to use those 5 phone calls as my prompt to reach out to an existing customer and see if he needs anything. That seems easy. 1 customer, 1 call. All you got to do is do that. So then suddenly you start to create these strings of tiny habits. I had a cup of coffee. I made 5 phone calls. I made 5 phone calls. I reached out to a client. Suddenly it just builds. And the next thing you see, you've got this foundation in place that is built on a habit you already had of getting yourself a cup of coffee. And suddenly your business starts to move forward towards success. Break your habits down to very, very small, and you'll find them easier to complete. And once they become habits, you build from there. And eventually you reach your bigger goals and your bigger aspirations of the growth that you want.